أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين صلوات please. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب صلوات. Assalamu alaikum, my dear brothers, elders and sisters, inshallah. Shukran. Yeah. I changed the order. So you see that after 6-7 nights, I'm trying to focus which day it is, alhamdulillah. But no, it's a barakah to meet all of you, and may Allah bless all of you. So if inshallah you've been following the lectures, we have been going logically to uncover these metaphysical, psychological, and ethical dimensions of the Prophet and his dear family. And yesterday we concluded on the notion of moral choice and the effects of our moral choice and judgments. That if we make a decision and it is a good one, God willing, we will see the positive effects in our life and inshallah in the next life if Allah wills. And if it is a bad decision, we may see it in this life and the next life. Now, I introduced that to you and I'm going step by step because so far we have been dealing with the choices that our beloved Prophet and indeed other prophets have made. So, Prophet Muhammad's choice to be patient when he's receiving verbal and physical abuse, which we're going to explore more so, inshallah, tomorrow. 2, we've also dealt with the different challenges our beloved Prophet faced, both internally in his soul, the psychological issues, the spiritual issues, and how, by the grace of Allah, he overcame it, which I hope and pray makes us closer to our beloved Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt. Allahumma salli ala. Rather than the notion that sometimes emerges that we are lowering the status, rather we are raising the status to learn from them. Now, this lecture, I want to focus on the choices that al-Husayn alayhi salam's parents made. That is, of course, Ali ibn Abi Talib and Lady Fatima, salamullahi alayha. The choices they made and how they brought up Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein. What did they exactly teach them? What was happening in their household? And are personalities between prophets and imams different? Right? As I've maybe said before, growing up, even maybe up until of age 20, I couldn't tell the difference between any prophet or any imam. They were all pious individuals, spiritual individuals. We give salawat on them. They are the ones that have taqwa. So I really couldn't tell the difference between each imam and what were their defining attributes. And I've said this before. It means, therefore, there was a distance between me and these people that I am meant to follow. And I want to try to reduce this distance by quoting some things for you from our text. It's a big lecture, or requires more research, but at least a few things that will give you an insight into why Imam Hussein made the decision to stand against Yazid ibn Muawiyah, why perhaps Imam al-Hassan took a different course of action, why our beloved Prophet took a course of action of perhaps sabr, and Prophet Yunus didn't, or Prophet Musa alayhi salam behaved in a certain way in accidentally killing someone. I'm trying to bring out certain personality traits that maybe we have not heard before, and why the choices of their parents and the environment led to the later decision in their lives. So the way we are raising children now, and those who are more experienced parents than me, for example, maybe we can always look at the logical chain that I made this decision early on, and now I can see the effects of this decision later in my life. So I want to try to reduce this gap. So the first thing I'm going to quote, and I have the reference here, this is from Kitabul Irshad, volume 2, page 7. This is by Sheikh al-Mufid, one of our greatest Shia scholars around the 10th century. This is also quoted in Al-Khisal, the famous hadith compilation by Sheikh al-Suduq. So this narration is there in our very early text. And it is a narration about Rasulullah's description of his grandsons. Okay, so you might sort of find it interesting. Okay, he says, أما الحسن فإن له حدي والسؤددي وأما الحسين فإن له جودي وشجاعتي. Okay, he says that as for Hassan, okay, his grandson Hassan alayhi salam, indeed for him is my guidance or my manner and my way or my mode, you can say, right? It's slightly difficult to translate, but in the sense that the Prophet is saying that Hassan has my manner or mannerism or way, way or habits, my guidance, a sense that he has got something of Rasulullah, where we can say that the way the Prophet behaved and acted is very similar to the way Imam Hassan is going to behave and act, okay? To put it like that. Then he says, وَسُؤْدَدِي. Su'dadi means my rule, my reign, my power or sovereignty. So there were two very defining attributes of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, according to Rasulullah, and at least according to what is reported, which is that Imam Hassan alayhi salam basically took after the Prophet's mannerisms or mode, as well as the way that he had sovereignty and power. Now, before I go into Imam Hussein, what do you know about Imam Hassan's life? Anything striking that comes out to you? Yes? Excellent, mashallah. Can we have salawat, please? Wow. So, that's a very good example. If you read Kitabul Irshad, and one of the famous things in history is the sulh, right? Or the pact between Imam Hussain and Muawiyah. Now, if you look at this narration is before Imam Hassan becomes Khalif. And I say Khalif because we do have sources, especially among Sunni sources, that he was regarded as a fifth Khalif. Okay, we have that. I wish I had these specific books, but if I recall correctly, perhaps As-Suyuti and maybe Ibn Kathir and one or two others do quote that in his time Imam Hassan was regarded as the fifth Khalif, which by the way also shows you that history could have gone very differently. I mean, if let's say the voice in history or the writers in history emphasize Imam Hassan as fifth Khalif, perhaps Shi'i and Sunnism would have become closer, maybe, I don't know, maybe. Or two, there would have been more respect for Ahlul Bayt generally in society. Three is that there would have been more amalgamation of teachings between the Khilafah and the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. So this is also a point just to show you that, we say history is his story, essentially. So, we had a discussion yesterday, mashallah, with some very close people here at OIL, and is a beautiful discussion because ultimately we discussed that after each imam, most of the imams, there was a lot of splits and divisions. You had a lot of sects which developed. So Kaysaniya sect, after 7th Imam, for example. Even before that, you have Ismailis, for example. You have Zaydis. So what I'm just painting to you is how we are reading history is very important. Because if we are reading it objectively, we have to look at all the viewpoints here. All the viewpoints. Okay, and I'm being honest with you. So if Imam Hassan alayhi salam is looked at by the Prophet as somebody that may possess this knack or skill of ruling in a particular way, and as Auntie said, signing a peace treaty, which was an act of great patience, by the way, and forbearance to do that with Muawiyah. But also you can say it was an act of courage, right? Because sometimes we say that Imam, there are discussions, Imam Hussein was very brave, Imam Hassan wasn't. These are very superficial discussions. You act in response to your circumstance. And Imam Hassan had the necessary skills and characteristics to respond to Muawiyah in this way. So maybe it makes sense what our beloved Prophet is saying as these defining characteristics of Imam al-Hassan. Now what about Imam Hussein? Well, he says that as for Imam Hussein or al-Husayn, Judi wa shuja'ati. Judi is my generosity, and shuja'ati is my bravery or courage. Very beautiful narration, right? So Rasulullah is seeing that as his two grandsons are growing up, he's clearly seeing some different personality traits. And it doesn't mean one is better than the other, right? We have to be clear about this, okay? What is clear is that the way that Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein are going to make choices in their life, and as we see, I see with my two children, you will see with your children, mashallah, you can advise me better, you already see early on the characters are a bit different. One is very sociable, maybe one is a bit more quiet, okay, one is always talking so much, one is more reflective, or sometimes it changes, later on it changes, by the way, I don't know, right? So all of this tells you that the way that we should look at the Prophet and Imams is first of all from the Qur'an, always from the Qur'an. If Allah is telling the Prophet, إِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ, you have this sublime character, or that you are responding, or you should respond to these disturbances or abuses in a particular way, and yet Yunus alayhi salam is doing something else, let's say by leaving the community, you already can see yourselves that even prophets themselves, as per the Qur'an, are described with different personality traits, so the responses are going to be different. And if you look at his judi, or you look at generosity, just to give you this example of how an early environment, an early decision, okay, of al-Husayn alayhi salam, or the way that he was shaped, has a later effect in Karbala. Look at this incident. This is reported in Kitab al-Irshad and Tariq al-Tabari, okay? Al-Husayn alayhi salam tells people who have joined him on the way to Iraq, because remember, he is going to Kufa to respond to people's invitation that these people will stand with him against Yazid ibn Muawiyah. So Al-Husayn is on his way. Now on his way, this is what Imam Hussein says. He says, any of you who may wish to change his way and join us in the journey to Iraq, we shall pay off your travel fare. We shall pay off your travel expenses. And you will receive our best treatment, he says. But if you decide to leave us, you don't want to now continue on the journey with me, then we will pay your travel fare up until the distance that you have traveled with me. Can you imagine Al-Husayn's generosity here? Even before standing on the plains of Karbala, he is respecting human dignity. I mean, today we talk about these contemporary terms, human dignity, right? That we should respect everybody's dignity and freedom of expression. We use these very fancy terms, right? And I'm not saying they don't have any depth. Of course they do. They've come out of a lot of philosophy. But these things you can also find in Karbala. Look, we don't have to look at the martyrdom immediately. That's secondary. Let's look at the journey and response of Al-Husayn alayhi salam. This journey and response is so crucial. Imam Hussein is making a choice, a judgment. There is no wahi here, okay? It's not that Imam Hussein knows everything that's going to happen, as sometimes we have this sort of attitude or discussion that Imam Hussein knew everything. If Imam Hussein alayhi salam knew everything, why is he giving this choice? He's putting himself in danger. He should be saying, come with me. I'm not going to give you a lot of choice. I'm going to put pressure on you. You sort of have to come with me to Kufa now, right? And if he didn't make this choice here and this sort of generosity of allowing people to leave, maybe we would still be commemorating al-Husayn in the same way. Maybe we would be saying, oh, look how Imam Hussein had great leadership skills and he put pressure on people, right, to come with him to Kufa. Do you see that our conception of Karbala and our conception of al-Husayn ibn Ali alayhi salam, to be very honest with you, depends on our reading of history. I believe that this is a more balanced way, that ultimately al-Husayn didn't know what was going to happen. He made a choice. He exercised what in his personality felt natural. It's natural for me to give these people a choice to join me or not, which is an act of generosity and an act of greatness, knowing full well that perhaps many people will leave and he will be left alone on the plains of Karbala. But he never forgoed his basic moral principles, which is what we have been discussing. Salawat. So, this is one very small example of how even personalities of two brothers can be different. Now on to a second example. Why did al-Husayn ibn Ali salam say certain statements in Karbala? I'll give you an example. Inshallah, we'll commemorate his beloved death tonight, that is al-Qasim ibn al-Hasan alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. When Qasim is martyred, it is reported in Tariq al-Tabari that he says, Sabran, Sabran, Ya Ahl al-Bayt, فوالله لا رأيتم حوانا بعد هذا اليوم أبدا. Okay, so when Al-Qasim is martyred, there is commotion in the camp of Al-Husayn ibn Ali. There is commotion. Because remember, Al-Qasim, as some reports say, was barely a teenager or in his teenage years, or a young man, you can say. So there is commotion because if somebody like that passes away, can you imagine the sadness, the reaction, the chaos that can occur? Because you're shocked. You are shocked that this beloved person of this camp, whose father isn't there, Imam al-Hasan is not in Karbala. So this poor Al-Qasim is there, relying on his uncle al-Husayn alayhi salam. And al-Husayn alayhi salam, as we will say in the Maqtal, feels so desperate that he cannot come to the aid or respond to al-Qasim alayhi salam, that al-Qasim is martyred. Okay? But here, al-Husayn says, patience, sabra. Patience, O members of the household, ya Ahl al-Bayt. Okay? He says, for wallahi, he takes an oath by Allah, I swear by Allah, for wallahi. He says, wallahi, that you will not see, right? You will not see this degradation. What we feel, what you are feeling now, this degradation, this sense that we are losing members of this household, the fact that people don't respect us. He says that you will not see this again, بَعْدَ هَذَا الْيَوْمِ أَبَدًا. You will not see this ever again after this day. Okay? Now, my question to you is, why is Al-Husayn saying sabran, have patience? Why is he saying patience? Why is he not acting in another way? See, this is my whole point here. And why I'm going deeper and deeper, but I'm hoping I'm holding your hand while I'm taking you on this journey, because I'm praying to Allah that I want to give you the definition of isma at the end of the lecture, because I'm setting up the scene, hopefully more critically, is that why do we have a notion sometimes that if a prophet or imam is regarded as infallible, then it means that he has to act in this particular manner, and he does not have choice to act in other ways. Did you see this? So if he has infallibility, automatically our mind goes to that, well, he has to be patient. He doesn't have a choice. He has to be patient. He has to have courage. right? He has to have wisdom, he has to have foresight. Fine. We are not denying that these traits are there in our beloved prophets and imams. The problem is that if infallibility and if saying that the perfection that prophet and imams had is extremely maximalistic and does not focus on their free will and choice and psychological dimensions, then it means they are no longer prophets and imams. And as people have been discussing here, we have turned them either into divinity, either into angels, or either into robots. And then no wonder, as I began in the first couple of lectures, that our dear youngsters, I still consider myself young, okay? I don't like our dear, ourselves, let's say ourselves, we're going to go on YouTube, and to be honest, let's be frank here, we're going to find whatever the clip is on TikTok and YouTube and whatever that motivational thing is of the day or the celebrity, that 2-minute clip, that's what we're going to watch. I think we should be very honest here. Yes? We're not going to listen to a 40-minute. You won't listen to me afterwards. And that's fine. No problem. You're not going to listen to 40-minute majlis and say, I want to find out about Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein. I mean, who's got the attention span for that? Right? So I'm saying this to you because the challenge is, the biggest challenge is that we want to be attracted to reading about the Prophet and Imams through our sources in a way that makes sense to us, in a way that is authentic from the Qur'an. If you notice, all the lectures I've started with Qur'an, right? How come on the 6th night, now I have said, I'm going to give you the definition of isma from theology? See, what we often do is we start with scholars' opinions. Of course, I respect all scholars. We'll start with the theology, right? I will quote to you a scholar from theology, or maybe of fiqh, I'll give you a definition, right? And we will move from there. And then you'll see me quoting, or other people quoting verses and hadith. But I haven't done that. I've started directly from Surat al-Qalam. And inshallah, I've maintained my consistency. Because you will see, inshallah, you will see, as I give you the definition, that the Qur'an is saying something else about prophets, and then our theological notion of infallibility and the perfection that we perceive in prophets and imams is something else. You will see the difference automatically. Okay, salawat. So, let me first give you, before going to this definition of isma, let me give you the training that Imam al-Hassan and Imam Hussein received, that our beloved al-Husayn ibn Ali alayhi salam says on the day of Ashura, Sabran ya Ahl al-Bayt. Where does he get this notion of how to react from? This is the advice of Ali ibn Abi Talib to his son. Okay? Now some say Al-Hasan, some say Muhammad ibn Hanafiya, depending on reports. It's the famous letter 31 of Nahj al-Balagha. Okay, which is the wonderful letter which gives us guidance of how to train our children. Okay, I've read it a couple of times, but every time I read it, it gives me sort of a new kind of idea or thinking, all right? And I'll just read a few lines to you so you can see. Imam Ali, before his death, states the following. He says to his sons, وَعَوِّدْ نَفْسَكَ التَّصَبْرَ عَلَى الْمَكْرُوهِ وَنِعْمَ الْخُلُقِ التَّصَبُّرُ فِي الْحَقِّ وَأَلْجِئُ نَفْسَكَ فِي أُمُورِكَ. Okay? He says, habituate yourself or get used to. You know, awid means like get used to or develop a habit, right? Habituate yourself to develop patience over adversities. Subhanallah. You can already see the training Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein, or in that household he is receiving. From a young age, Imam Ali is saying that, son, please inculcate in yourself a habit to have patience over makruh, things that are disliked, things that are of adversity. And then he says, ni'mal khuluq. Again, this word khuluq is coming again, which is from the Qur'an. إِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. Now, you see the same word coming in the letter 31, right? He says, the best disposition is to develop patience in righteousness and in all your affairs. I didn't finish it. في أمورك كلها إلى إلهك. He says, in all your affairs, take a refuge yourself in God. Because indeed, you will be taking refuge in a guarded shelter and a mighty protector. Doesn't this tell you that Imam Husayn's decision in Karbala directly came from his upbringing and environment? Exactly to the T. Develop patience, he's developing patience. Seeking refuge in God, he's seeking refuge in God. He's not losing hope. And even when he feels this sense of disturbance, he's still calling out to Allah, you are my protector. This is the first example I'm giving you. And then two, Imam Ali says, Ya bunayya, ij'al nafsaka mizanan fima baynaka wa bayna ghayrik. فَأَحْبِبْ لِغَيْرِكَ مَا تُحِبُّ لِنَفْسِكَ. It's the golden rule. O son, make yourself as a measure for that which is between you and others. So love for others what you love for yourself. So beautiful. The children are taught the golden rule, as we would today say in Western terms, early on in their life. So this example I gave you of the people that were with al-Husayn and then Imam Hussain giving them that free choice stems from this upbringing. How would Imam Hussain like to be treated if he was in a caravan and perhaps didn't want to be there? He's exacting his same feelings or expressing his same feelings when giving that choice to people. And a last one, before I go into a bit of theology, the last one I found probably the most impactful, I think, in the whole letter, at least to me. Okay? I found this statement astounding. Imam Ali says, wa'lam, that means know. Ya bunayya, innaka, innama, khuliqta li akhirati, la lid dunya, walil fana'i, la lil baqa, walil mawti, la lil haya. I found this, I don't know how Imam Ali and Lady Fatima taught this to the children. But they said, know, O my son, that you have been created for the akhirah, for the hereafter, not for the world. You are created for like termination or annihilation, not for permanency, not that you are living in this world forever. And you are created for death, not life. Can you imagine that? Teaching this, even if to teenagers or a young person, saying to them, look, I'm just telling you that you are going to die. I'm being a bit curt, but the phraseology is very impactful. Imam Ali is saying to their children that, look, you're not going to live in this life for long, but you are created for the akhirah. Whatever you are doing, think, have a vision for your long-term future in the akhirah, right? Just to go back to the example of these YouTube videos and motivational things and new age spiritualities, a lot of these videos talk about, or every other video, you get that advert, how to make money quickly. You get these adverts? Yeah, these schemes, yeah? What are you doing with your life, working 9 to 5 and all that, right? A lot of these videos is get-rich-quick schemes, right? And these motivational videos about focusing on yourself and having objectives and not listening to the naysayers, a lot of it is orientated with this world. It's about this world. There is no long-term thinking at all. There is no spiritual thinking about what is our existence after this life. And that is what a number of us or our youngsters are listening to. That's the advice they get. So the building of the life and the planning of the life is very much oriented for this world. Whereas the training that al-Husayn and al-Hasan and others received in that household is essentially another worldly training. So now, Imam Hussain departing Madinah and Makkah, not giving allegiance, and not fearing for his life stems from this. He is, in all probability, 90% aware that he's going to be killed. He knows each person is coming up to al-Husayn alayhi salam, oh uncle, can I go on the battlefield? Yes, Al-Qasim asks, okay? Or oh, and Muhammad, or any Ali al-Akbar, or even Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam on the day of Ashura, saying, my dear father, how can I let you go onto the plains of Karbala? right? You know, all of these things that we narrate in the Maqtal, which generally we do not philosophize or understand, stems from this notion that in that camp, they didn't have a fear of death. And that was something that was in the household of Ahlul Bayt. This notion that the decision-making power was related to the Akhirah. But still they had that challenge of patience and even accepting that fact. And even the struggle of being killed and calling out, oh my uncle, come to my aid, come to my aid. Even at that point, they still need comfort, they still need help, right? So whatever these principles are, they still have to put that into practice. But hopefully I've illustrated to you, inshallah, this element of choice, environment, upbringing, and free will. Salawat. Now, hopefully from the Qur'an and from these principles, you may ask, okay, fine, this might sound very nice, and you might see a logical sort of chain here developing from Qur'an. But then, as a number of you asked, but then how do we understand this perfection and infallibility which prophets and imams possess? Now, I'm going to quote to you exactly the statements from our own Shia scholars, which represents the majority opinion of Shia scholars, about what infallibility means, right? So, this is the statement of Allama Hilli, one of our greatest Shia scholars, rahmatullahi alayh, in his famous book, Kashful Murad, okay, fi Sharh Tajrid al-I'tiqad, page 471. This is the standard definition of isma that you'll find scholars quoting, and indeed what you may have heard. Okay, he says, it is necessary for the prophets to possess isma, infallibility. Why? In order for us to obtain confidence in his message, that is the prophet, so that the goal of submitting to and obeying God is fulfilled. Okay? So there are two dimensions of isma. Isma in relation to the character of the prophet, which I'm going to go on to, which means the prophet doesn't commit any major or minor sin. And the second dimension you see here, and this is where the confusion results, that infallibility is not just about the prophet's character. Infallibility is a doctrine, is a type of interpretation, is a type of idea for us to make sense of how the risala, the message of the prophet, can be protected, okay, so that the goal of submitting to God is fulfilled. Where is the link? If the prophet commits a major sin, let's say he lies, God forbid, let's say he's a liar, God forbid, how can we trust the revelation of the Qur'an? Do you understand the link here? How can we trust it? So what Shia scholars are doing, they're trying to say, well, what notion can we come up with which helps us look at the prophet in a way that is perfect or elevated? Fine, no problem. But in the same way that we can understand that, okay, he is a human being, but this message also needs to be protected here. So they are saying that the infallibility is a way for us to actually protect the message of Allah, that if we have confidence in the Prophet's moral character, we know that abadan, he doesn't lie. We know that when he's saying a verse, Ikra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq, oh, we know the Prophet is telling the truth. Does everybody understand this link? So where the confusion starts is we are kind of adding on something else by saying that we need to protect the risala. We need to protect the message that the Prophet is saying. So there are two dimensions, character and risala. Okay? We'll continue. Okay? If sin and disobedience were permissible for prophets, that means if they could sin, And if prophets disobeyed Allah, then it would be permitted in their actions, and then we would follow the prophets and we would be misguided. And then how can Allah do that? Right? So now you see the issue happening here and why some of your questions came. The minute we allow any room for some wrong choice, for some wrong judgment, for something that looks like a sin in the Prophet's or Imam's life, what's in jeopardy? I know that you've understood the message. You see the issue here. So what happens then is in our statements or in the way we present the Prophet and Imams from the pulpit, we want a totally maximalistic view of Prophets and Imams. We don't want to allow any room for fear, anxiety, psychological disturbance, because if that enters, oh no, the message of the Qur'an is in jeopardy. Do you see what has happened? But what I have humbly painted to you, which is not me, it's the Qur'an has a different discourse. Because the Qur'an is admitting that these fears and anxieties existed in the prophets. And that Yunus and Adam and Musa alayhi salam, all of these made judgments, and even if you don't want to call them sin, no problem, but you've got to call them something. What are you going to call them? I mean, what do you want to say? You want to say wrong choice? You want to say error in judgment? You want to say tarkul awla, leaving the first or the best? Okay, I don't want to dress anything up. You know, I'm just trying to tell you, you have to choose some terminology to describe this. Because Shia scholars or scholars want to save this risala, right? Salawat, please. I have 10 minutes. Okay, shall I move on or not? Because I don't want it to be too heavy. Do you want me to move on? Because there is another dimension to this. Yes? Another dimension. Okay. YouTube people, they want to continue. Right. Okay. Right. So, right. The second issue with this, is you might ask, how do we resolve this? So, this is how we resolve the conflict, generally within Shia theology, right? So this statement is from Ayatollah Sheikh Jafar Subhani, okay, wonderful scholar, has a number of works. This is in his Muhadirat fil Ilahiyat, page 282. This is his book of theological discussions, very nice book, right? Now he says, the infallible is potentially able to commit disobedience. He is potentially able. So he can do it. Okay, these are his words. He's potentially able to commit the disobedience. Disobedience is known as ma'siyah. Okay? By the necessitating factor that he has been given the ability, the qudra, and freedom to do so. So Allah has given freedom, absolute freedom, for prophets and imams to disobey Allah. That is 100% there. Okay? Except now, so here is the shart or the condition, except that that is the prophet or imam's sublime God consciousness, his taqwa, and knowledge of the effects of the sin, his ilm. So now knowledge is playing a role here. That's why I gave this letter 31, because Imam and Lady Fatima trained their dear sons and daughters to have knowledge of the sin. And so accept that the taqwa and the knowledge of the effects of the sin, and if you like, basira, the perception of the greatness of Allah stops him from sinning. Okay? So now you have three dimensions here added within this definition of isma, because isma means infallibility and protection from committing major and minor sin. I have my own humble definition of isma. I'm going to give it to you, inshallah. But here you see that there is freedom to commit disobedience. Two, that the taqwa and their knowledge and understanding of Allah prevents them from doing so. So now these three are the human factors here. So what I have humbly shared with you in the first 5-6 nights from the Qur'an doesn't actually contradict the notion of isma. Because there is freedom, there is taqwa, okay, and there is the perception of Allah, right? Now, there is another issue which comes, which is, fine, if they have the freedom not to commit sin, right, so then how do they make the decision not to commit the sin? Because the Quran clearly says that they did suffer this psychological disturbance. That's absolutely clear. Prophet Yunus was angry and did leave his community. Adam alayhi salam was quite attracted to the tree or the fruit. So the issue is, if they have these freedoms, what's happening to their taqwa then? And that's why I said that we have to look at isma in terms of gradation, or the Prophet's life and Prophet's journey as degrees, as development, rather than a static notion, rather than an all or nothing notion. That's why I said the Prophet at age 20 is a different man to age 40 and a different man to 60. That doesn't mean that any judgments he made is now corrupting his soul. But what it does mean, we do have to allow some room for some kind of judgment where he is using his human judgment and free will. We have to allow it. Because if we do not allow it, then this Shia theology doesn't make sense at all. Because, okay, well, how does he use notion, freedom? Where is his ability? Where is his taqwa? It doesn't make sense then. Then just cancel this bit out of theology. Just say that, as people say, that's it. They are given the nur of Allah and no further discussion, which is the standard answer given, if you agree. Yes, that's the standard answer given. But then the Quran doesn't make sense and this theology doesn't make sense. So for me, that is not the realistic answer, the Quranic answer. Okay? I'll give you one more quote, inshallah, to make it clear. This is from Allama Tabatabai, rahimahullah alayh, from Al-Mizan. This is volume 11, page 163. All right? Allama Tabatabai says, and I think this is quite interesting. He says, the faculty of infallibility does not change the human nature of the freedom to choose in one's actions, and does not bring forth force and compulsion. Now this is more nuanced, I say, and I think Allama Tabatabai, although it doesn't say explicitly, I think from my humble reading so far, he is trying to bring out this journey of the Prophet. He's really trying to bring it out. Like I've given you phrases before, that this verse is revealed, why? لِتَقْوِيَةِ النَّفْسِ النَّبِي, to strengthen the soul of the Prophet, or لِإِزَالَةِ الْقَلِقِ وَإِضْطِرَابِ, to remove the distress and anxiety. I think Allama Tabatabai is trying to bring out these dimensions, right? That's why whenever somebody quotes to you something from Shia scholarship, the first question to ask is, wait, where is this from and from what viewpoint? Because every scholar will have some sort of color and some sort of bias in his or her approach to the interpretation. That's not something negative. I have my bias. I'm being open about it. Yes, I'm reading Quran in a particular manner, no problem. Trying to be objective as possible, right? But here, Allama Tabatabai is saying that Isma should not affect that natural nature of freedom for the Prophet or Imam to choose, and should not bring force and compulsion. So here is this a very important point. Infallibility cannot mean that God is forcing the Prophet and Imams. And it cannot mean that whatever you believe in the way Prophets and Imams are created, right, that there is nur and there is this substance, whatever you want to say, at the end of the day, it can't be that they are forced by their nature to make this decision. It can't be. Because then it removes this natural freedom that they should have. And then he gives a very beautiful example. He says, it is like the flawless student, right? A very good student who is completely certain about the reality of a liquid that is poison. which kills one, leading to his death. So this student, who is a very bright student, knows that this liquid is going to kill him or her. So he resists or abstains from drinking it with his free choice. I think that is a beautiful definition of isma. Right? There is a resistance, there is an abstaining from prophets and imams, knowing the nature and consequence of their action, which is what I discussed yesterday. The Qur'an is saying the Prophet, you will see and they will see. بِأَيِّكُمُ الْمَفْتُونَ. Okay, who is going to be enraptured and crazy? Right? That's why the nature effects of our actions is very important, right? So I think Allama Tabatabai's notion, I feel, is very balanced. Okay? Before going to the Maqtal, I want to leave this with you because then inshallah I'll continue tomorrow. My humble definition of isma is not infallibility. It is protective abstinence. Protective abstinence. That is, protective means there is a grace of Allah, definitely, that they are receiving, a lutf. But abstinence is from them. They are abstaining and they are refraining from the action, okay? But one thing that I still am not satisfied with, which inshallah we'll explore tomorrow, I still think that Allama Tabatabai's definition, as beautiful as it is, we can expand it further and we can review the nature of isma even further to reconcile it with the Quranic story of Prophet Yunus and Prophet Muhammad, inshallah. Salawat. In this night, my dear brothers and sisters, we have lost our beloved Qasim. Qasim, the son of al-Hasan alayhi salam. That Qasim who, when people looked to him, they saw a mature young man or young teenager who understood the notion of death. As some reports say, that when people were asked about death in the camp of al-Husayn, or whether they would become martyrs, he said, death is sweeter than honey, as some reports may allude to. Whatever the case, a young man, a young teenager, hurling himself into the battlefield, surely must move our hearts. Today, we have children of our own, children that have grown up or are married or not married, but we love our children. We love our children to our core. Can you imagine letting a young person go in the face of death? Knowing full well now that this person, this young child or young man will not come back to you. It is not just Qasim's decision. How did al-Husayn, how did Zainab bint Ali make this decision? How did they allow him to go to the battlefield? They have a duty to al-Hasan. Al-Husayn has a duty to his brother to look after al-Qasim. Zainab bint Ali, his aunt, has a duty. Can you imagine that now they must say to Allah, they must say to al-Hasan, this is the decision of your child. We must respect this decision, but we are the Ahl al-Bayt. We do not fear death, for we are created for the Akhirah. Qasim goes into the battlefield. As he goes into the battlefield, he raises his sword and does his best to injure or kill others. But alas, one of the soldiers strikes him and he falls to the ground. As he is falling to the ground, don't you think Qasim would want to call out to his father? He cannot call out to his father. So who does he call out to? He says, oh my uncle, come to my aid. He says, this is the next best person he can call to. So he says, oh my uncle, come to my aid. Al-Husayn goes to the body of Al-Qasim. Qasim raises out his hand. He wants somebody to comfort him. Al-Husayn does his best, but he says, alas, I was not there in time. And as is reported in Tariq Tabari, that Al-Qasim was in agony. His legs were in agony. His body was in agony. And Al-Husayn is holding him. And this is where he says to his family, Sabran ya Ahl al-Bayt. How much sabr did Qasim have? How much sabr did Zainab bint Ali have in seeing this tragedy unfold before her? Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Oh Allah, we ask you on this night to please help us learn from the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, that we, inshallah, I remind myself, we remind each other, to become more patient, to have strength over adversities, to not fear death, and that if we fear death because of our sins, we ask Allah, please forgive our sins. Please forgive our marhumin sins. Oh Allah, please help us fight oppression, and may you hasten the reappearance of our dear 12th Imam, Imam Muhammad al-Mahdi, Ajrallahu farajah. ربنا لا تجعلنا مع قوم الظالمين. سورة الفاتحة.
Question. Going back to your earlier point right at the start of your lecture tonight about had the Prophet not had an impeccable character,
yes,
the Qur'an would not have been revealed to him by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I believe that's what you said. If we take that one step further, the Qur'an is replete with references to prophetic figures, Yahya, Yaqub, and as well as Isa and Musa, etc., and Maryam.
Yes.
So the Quran is full of those references, but then so too are the New Testament and the Old Testament. How does one, or how would you effectively reply to the charge that the Holy Prophet plagiarized the New Testament and the Old Testament to be able to include the stories of those prophets and of Mary in the Quran? I mean, when I have to face an atheist and I'm asked that, I say, well, the Prophet couldn't have done that because he was not literate. So he couldn't have read it in the Bible or the Torah. So there's no way he could have plagiarized it. Is that the only argument that is potentially that we could utilize here? Any thoughts on that?
Yes. Shukran, Shabir. Very, very good question. That first of all, what you have said is one of the key arguments. We have a verse in the Quran. I have it in my notes. I forget the Quran verse number, but Allah says, "Had you been able to write with your right hand, then the criticizers, the impugners, would have said that you have obtained this from the previous scriptures." Okay, so this is a direct verse of the Quran, exactly to your argument. The second bit is, yes, the literacy argument is the key one, which is we do not have evidence that he ever read or wrote anything, even perhaps till he passed away. 3, is there anything else to show, of how to show that he didn't plagiarize? Well, the other thing is there's no evidence that he was taught also by a Christian or Jewish scholar in his time. I've not seen anything like that, right? And those narrations that we have about Waraka ibn Nawfal or Buhaira the monk, some of these narrations are questioned, like as Israeliyat, that these are brought in to reduce this uniqueness and miraculous nature of the revelation to Rasulullah. 4, the other thing I have to say is that the Quran contains scientific miracles or events of the future demonstrating its uniqueness, that even if you say he had copied, let's accept it, okay, where did these other things come from? Because those things were not there in the other scriptures. And then not only that, those miracles, even for example, the fact that Abu Lahab was cursed, or that Walid ibn Mughira would lose his wealth, right, and his sons, Even those things happening in his real life actually happened later on, after the verse was revealed. And then you have, for example, the scientific miracles and other things. And those things weren't there in the previous scriptures. I mean, these are just off the top of mind some of these arguments, inshallah. Yes.
Assalamu alaikum. Yesterday we got, I'm going back to yesterday's lecture.
Yes.
And what I took away from it, and maybe if I'm wrong, please correct me, was that our actions can lead to our effect in dunya or akhirah.
Yes.
And one of the things you said, somebody had asked that Muawiyah be killed, but nobody killed Muawiyah,
Yes.
and we had a lot of impact on it.
Yes.
And similarly, a lot of other things that we do have a lot of impact on the society.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of difficulty with that in the sense, we see a lot of actions happening that in Syria, people were displaced, innocent people were displaced. In Ukraine, innocent kids are being killed. In Sudan, there are two power fighting, innocent people are being displaced, and so on all over the world. Why would Allah, subhanAllah, affect these innocent people for the action of some other people? And these people have no impact on it. They have no ability to do that. And I think that I find a lot of difficulty with. And I think that is what has been said in the Quran. Then I think we have to reinterpret the Quran.
Yes, mashallah. Thank you, Uncle. It's a very good question. So, one is that we are talking about the mind and will of Allah. Always difficult to unravel. We know one thing which is clear. He has created this world with free will, and it operates according to certain laws. And God isn't going to intervene in that free will. If a dictator comes and is killing people and we're not doing anything about it, that's not God's fault. He's created this universe and He's given us choice. If we expect that God to interfere in every single action, you can't say it's free will. I mean, if you want to say, right, those innocent people in Yemen or Sudan should be saved, okay, so where do you draw the line? God then will interfere. I want God to stop me from doing an immoral action. He didn't even do that in the Prophet's lives either. He allowed them to make the choices as He wanted, right? So we have to see that the conditions of the universe do allow for such things to happen. That is why there is what we have as Yawm al-Qiyamah or Yawm al-Mu'ad. There is a day in which we are all held accountable. There is effects of these sins or dhulm in this world, right? And three, which I think is a very hard question to answer, I don't have the answer, is allowing a child to pass away or be killed, or a young person or an innocent person. I mean, we would say that person goes to heaven, yes? Okay? But what about the impact on the family? Yes? We have to be honest about it, that the trauma. And either we say there is a beautiful aspect to the will of Allah, that the akhirah, like I said, we are created for the akhirah, not this life, that whoever is in the akhirah, that soul that is in the akhirah, is being sustained by Allah, and that is an element of bliss and happiness for that soul. So whilst it's sad, the soul doesn't feel sad. The innocent person doesn't feel sad, right? For the family, and I think it's a very hard question to answer, is that a lesson, not a lesson that they've done something wrong, God forbid, but is that an experience which makes their soul stronger or makes them nearer to Allah or allows them to shape their life in a certain way? Because remember, Prophet was an orphan. I'm ending here. This point is, if Prophet wasn't an orphan, would the revelation of Qur'an come to him? Would he have behaved in the way that he behaved in the society? My humble answer is no. Because him being an orphan, he had so much feeling for the oppressed in that society, that at the age around 20 or young man, he said, I'm participating in this pact of justice before Wahi. This shaped his life. That orphan, who did he seek out? Allah. He didn't seek out a human teacher. So you see that this free will gives us the strength to move closer to Allah. But I'm not saying that's a perfect answer, but some food for thought, inshallah.
I have two questions on infallibility,
Yes.
short ones.
Yes.
My understanding is that the word isma comes from ism, which means noun or name or attribute.
No, that's alif, sin, mim.
Oh, this is not that.
This is ayn, isma.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
That clarifies.
Yes. I will go into that tomorrow.
Okay.
Yes.
And the other question that I had is that if I understood correctly, you said that infallibility was a doctrine that was devised by the scholars, which helped to show that the Prophet wouldn't lie or plagiarize or whatever. So I understand that there is also a verse in the Qur'an that when the Prophet was concerned about not being able to memorize the verses correctly, that Allah reassures him by saying that Allah takes the responsibility for the preservation of the Qur'an. So why do we need the doctrine of infallibility then?
Okay, mashallah, very good question, Auntie, thank you. So the verse that you're referring to, if I'm correct, is Sanuqri'uka fala tansa, from Surat al-A'la. There may be other verses, but this is one verse that, so we will remind you so you don't forget. Yes, Surat al-A'la. Yes. You are right, and obviously Allah says it challenges us to produce a chapter like of the Quran. Yes, we have this throughout the Quran. So God takes that responsibility 100%, but God operates through a messenger, through a Rasul or a Nabi. It's not that God is directly giving this to us, it's through an intermediary. Now, who is going to protect that intermediary? If the message is coming to Rasulullah and Rasulullah is a human being, so then the reason why this doctrine of Isma comes is to say, well, okay, once we understand God protects everything, no problem, but then once the Quran is revealed here in this natural human environment, look, Prophet has memory, has a brain, has ability, has free will. How are you going to reconcile all of these freedom and natural biological attributes with protection in the Quran? That's when this doctrine came. To understand that once this revelation is coming in human form, if you like, in words, how are you going to protect these words? So to answer your question, that's why this doctrine has come, because that's to tackle the human side of it. But you say, when we say rely on God, what do we mean? Because it's come to the Prophet, we have to deal with, it's like compilation of Quran, right? When you say, oh, God will protect everything, but the compilation of Quran involved human people. And if human people make errors, how do we understand history? So every point of Rasulullah's journey, we have to understand how is this Quran being protected through himself as well, through his character. I can't believe in God unless I believe his intermediary. If I might believe Rasulullah is lying. So first of all, I have to say, who is the Prophet? And that's why some people who don't believe in Islam, they believe Prophet was a madman. So you see where Isma comes in. People who don't believe in Islam, one of the arguments is, I don't trust the Prophet, he's a madman. So Isma comes to say, wait, hold on a second. This can't be the case because he's got the risala, he's got the message. He can't be mad. He's got to tell the truth, he's got to distinguish right or wrong. So you have to start with the Prophet's character first, before accepting the risala. Yes? If that helps, inshallah. Yeah, sorry, the sister has a question.
When Imam Hussein went into the battlefield to respond to people's calls, why did the enemies kill him too? Okay,
shukran, mashallah, very good question. So when al-Husayn went in the battlefield and said, Hal min nasir yansurna, yes, like anybody would call out to our aid. You mean when he was saying this, why didn't people kill him? Okay, so one is that this call was said throughout the journey. It wasn't just said on the day of Ashura. I mean, in the sense that he was trying to tell people, come and help us, number one. Number two, in that time there was one-to-one combat. So it means that people were sent out to have a battle, right? It's not like today where it's warfare and nuclear warfare and missiles and this open sort of warfare. There was some kind of, structural order to the battle. So when people went out, there was a respect that there should be one-to-one combat or that there should be a like of like, number one. Number two. Number three, sadly what gradually happened the day of Ashura, that one-to-one combat was broken, especially when al-Husayn Islam was killed. So your question that why didn't they kill Imam Hussein? Because Imam Hussein went last into the battlefield. Why did he go last? Because there were people like Abbas alayhi salam and others, and Ali al-Akbar, who would not allow their father to go first. Surely not. And not just as a matter of a personal respect, but he is the Imam. Surely they have hope. Maybe al-Husayn would survive and continue the message of the Prophet. So they would protect that person as much as possible. He is that pure person of the household. Say, no, let's do our best to protect him. So he went last in the end. Yes? Inshallah.
Keep my question brief.
Yes.
What I want to understand is this concept of Isma, which makes the Nabi or the Imam Ma'soom,
Yes.
right? To what level is it the same concept that applies to all other prophets? And then this unique Isma that the Shia have applied to the 14 Ma'soomin? Because I understand that in order to validate the message, you need to have a context, and Isma comes to, it also necessitates. But I have a curious question. How much of this was theologically developed later, and how much of it was true at the time, so we can differentiate it? And why aren't all the prophets who also, by necessity, must have Isma to keep their books pure or valid? Or is there a difference, or isn't there one?
Okay, mashallah, very good question. So one is, yes, a lot of these theological deliberations came to after, definitely, number one. If you're talking about the Prophet's time, as we are seeing in the Qur'an, people didn't appear to have this notion, but they did identify the Prophet through his moral attributes. Definitely that is there. Now, whether they had this conception, this maximalistic conception that maybe we have today, I'm not so sure they had it, because my reading so far in the tafsir and history is they didn't. They openly went to the Prophet, they questioned him, they looked at the Prophet as one of them. There wasn't this notion. So that's to answer that part. So this came after. As for the other prophets or imams and other things, well, there is difference of opinion as to, for example, does Abbas al-Islam have Isma? Does Zainab bint Ali have Isma? Fatima, although it's known as al-Ma'asuma, there is difference of opinion there. Because they are not regarded as the people who continue the Risala after the Prophet. So it's not as necessitating or important for them. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But there's difference of opinion. As for other prophets, we'll deal with this tomorrow with Prophet Yunus directly. I think that either we say the Prophet was like Prophet Yunus and all other prophets, and we then have to look at these judgments and fears and anxieties, and then we've made the Isma to maximum. Or we say, as you were indicating, that the Prophet, peace upon him, attained such a high degree that we can differentiate with the other prophets that didn't achieve that station. And I think this second point, is more realistic. I think we can compare, let's say, Yunus and the Prophet, and I think maybe there were different stations and degrees. That's my reading of history so far. But I'm going to expand tomorrow, inshallah.
Assalamualaikum. So I know there's very little time. But first of all, I actually just want to commend you for the way that you have walked everybody, the whole audience, this whole process of talking about aspects of Islam and the knowledge and the free will that was also granted to the Muslim. In any case, the thing that I did want to add to was to Shabir's question, when you asked about, I know you've added a lot of information here, but as far as this plagiarization of the earlier testaments, for one thing, I haven't read through all of the Old Testament, but halfway, and not all of the New Testament. But allow me to say that the Quranic account of these prophets and Sayyidah Maryam is so sublime. The older books do not come very close, especially in the case of the Old Testament. There is so much violence in the name of God. It's unbelievable. And also that the word hereafter does not exist in the Torah. a professor from Bar-Ilan University confirmed that for me. So I just wanted to say that here's another fact or facts that actually show that the Quran is way above, head and shoulders and no comparison in terms of the quality of content and the logic.
Shukran. I just say one very small thing. This is, mashallah, a very good point. This is the argument of Marhum Ayatollah Khui. Mashallah, in Prolegna to he makes, I did forget it, so mashallah. He said that if you compare the scriptures, the earlier scriptures really paint sometimes the degrading ways of the prophets, that they committed sometimes these very filthy sins. Whereas in the Quran, although we are dealing with these things about fear, anxiety, and all that, they're not painted in that degrading way. So there is a marked difference in the attitude of how the prophets are portrayed.